Commander Vexitar Holn walked slowly into the large room where young Zephyrian soldiers sat waiting. His old body moved with care, each step showing the weight of many battles. Deep scars covered his blue shell-like skin, telling stories of wars fought long ago. The bright lights above made his battle wounds shine like badges of honor. The young cadets whispered to each other as he entered. They had heard stories about the Great War, about the strange new species that changed everything, but none of them had ever met someone who actually fought beside the humans. Their large eyes followed every movement as the old commander made his way to the front of the room. Vextar stopped and looked at each face. These young ones thought they knew about war because they had studied it in books. They had learned about proper battle tactics and honorable combat. They believed war was about following rules and fighting with dignity. How wrong they were. "You think you know war," Vextar said, his deep voice filling the quiet room. "But until you have seen humans fight, you know nothing at all." A young cadet raised her hand. "Sir, we have studied all the great battles. We know about strategy and tactics. What could these humans teach us that we do not already know?" Vextar smiled, but it was not a happy smile. It was the smile of someone who had seen things that changed him forever. "Child, everything you know about war is wrong. The humans showed us that." He moved to a large screen on the wall and pressed a button. Images appeared, showing a map of the galaxy. Most of it was colored red, showing the territory controlled by their enemy. 5 years ago, the Hegemony Empire controlled 70% of known space, Vextar began. Their machines were unstoppable. Their ships were faster and stronger than ours. Their weapons could destroy entire planets. We had been fighting them for 12 years, and we were losing badly. The cadets stared at the map. They knew this history, but hearing it from someone who lived through it made it feel real and frightening. "Every battle we fought ended the same way," Vextar continued. "We would line up our ships in proper formation. We would announce our presence to give the enemy a chance to surrender honorably. We would fight according to the ancient rules of war, and we would lose." He pressed another button, and the screen showed pictures of destroyed coalition ships floating in space like broken toys. The Council of Worlds was desperate. We had tried everything we knew. Our best generals had failed. Our greatest weapons were useless. We were running out of time, running out of ships, running out of hope. A young male cadet spoke up. "But sir, what about the defense of Altair Prime? General Kethvar won that battle using traditional tactics." Kethvar delayed the enemy for 3 days, Vextar replied. "Then they destroyed the planet anyway. 40 billion lives lost because we were too proud to change our ways." The room fell silent. Everyone knew about Altair Prime, but they had been taught it was a great victory, not a terrible defeat. "That is when the scouts found Earth," Vextar said. "A small blue planet on the edge of the galaxy. The humans had never traveled between stars. They had never met another species. They were still fighting wars with metal bullets and explosive shells." Some of the cadets laughed quietly. The idea of fighting with such primitive weapons seemed silly to them. "Do not laugh," Vexitar said firmly. Those primitive weapons had taught them something we had forgotten. They had learned that war is not about honor or following rules. War is about winning by any means necessary. He changed the image again. Now it showed a human male in a simple military uniform. The man looked ordinary, with brown hair and tired eyes. Nothing about him seemed special or impressive. "This is Colonel Jake Morrison," Vextar said. "The first human I ever met. When he arrived at Coalition Command, our generals expected a formal ceremony. They prepared speeches about honor and glory. They wore their finest uniforms and arranged everything according to proper protocol." Vextar paused, remembering that day clearly. Morrison walked into the room wearing a plain green uniform with no decorations. He did not bow or give formal greetings. He looked at our battle plans for exactly 30 seconds, then said, "This is all wrong. You are fighting their war instead of your own." The cadets looked confused. What did that mean? General Zathmore was insulted, Vextar continued. He demanded to know what a primitive human could teach civilized beings about warfare. Morrison just smiled and asked one simple question. "How many battles have you won using these tactics?" Vextar pressed the button again. The screen now showed detailed battle plans covered in complex diagrams and formations. For 3 hours, our best military minds explained why their tactics were correct. They talked about honor in battle, about giving the enemy fair warning, about fighting, according to ancient traditions. Morrison listened without saying a word. When they finished, Morrison stood up and drew a simple picture on the board. It showed 2 armies facing each other. Then he drew arrows showing one army attacking the other from behind while they were distracted. The cadets looked shocked. Such tactics were considered dishonorable, even shameful. General Zathmore was angry, Vextar said. He accused Morrison of promoting cowardly tactics without honor. Morrison replied, "Honor is fine when you are winning. When you are losing, honor gets everyone killed." Vextar moved closer to his audience. Morrison asked us to try one battle his way. Just one. If it failed, they would leave Earth and never bother us again. If it worked, we would listen to their ideas. The screen changed to show a star system with a large space station surrounded by enemy ships. Kepler Station, Vexitar said. The enemy had captured it 6 months earlier. It controlled the main shipping routes to 12 different worlds. Our strategist had been planning an attack for weeks. He showed them the coalition battle plan. It was complex and detailed, showing exactly how their ships would approach in formation, how they would announce their attack, and how they would give the enemy time to surrender before fighting. Our plan would have worked eventually, Vextar admitted. After 3 or 4 days of fighting, with heavy losses on both sides, we might have retaken the station. Maybe 60% of our forces would have survived. Morrison looked at our plan and shook his head. Then he showed us something we had never seen before. The screen now displayed a completely different battle plan. Instead of one large attack, it showed multiple small groups approaching from different directions. Some were disguised as cargo ships. Others were moving through asteroid fields. One group was even planning to use captured enemy vessels. "This is madness," Vextar had told Morrison that day. "You cannot fight a proper battle using tricks and deception." Morrison replied, "We are not fighting a proper battle. We are fighting to win." Vextar looked at each cadet carefully. "I want you to understand something important. At that moment, I thought the humans were cowards. I believed they were too weak to fight with honor. I was completely wrong." He pressed the button one final time. The screen showed the results of the Battle of Kepler Station. The coalition forces had won in just 6 hours. Enemy losses were total. Coalition casualties were almost 0. We accomplished more in 6 hours than we had in 6 months of traditional warfare, Vextar said quietly. The humans had not just won a battle, they had shown us that everything we thought we knew about war was wrong. The room was completely silent now. The young cadets were beginning to understand that their comfortable ideas about warfare were about to be challenged. "That was the beginning," Vextar said. "The beginning of our education in the human way of war. And trust me, young ones, you have no idea what is coming next." Vextar moved slowly around the room, looking at each young face. The cadets sat perfectly still, waiting to hear more about these strange humans who had changed everything they thought they knew about war. "Your species fights like civilized beings," Vextar said, his voice carrying the weight of memory. "We follow rules. We announce our attacks. We give enemies time to surrender. We fight with honor." He paused and looked directly at a young female cadet in the front row. "Humans fight like they are completely insane, and that is exactly why they win." The cadet shifted uncomfortably in her seat. The idea of fighting without honor seemed wrong to everything she had been taught. "Let me tell you about the Battle of Kepler Station," Vextar continued. "Not the simple version you read in history books. The real story of what I saw with my own eyes." He activated the wall screen again, showing a detailed map of the space station. It was huge, with multiple levels and sections connected by long corridors. Enemy ships surrounded it like angry insects protecting their nest. Morrison's plan seemed impossible, Vextar said. He wanted to split our forces into 12 different groups. Each group would attack from a different direction at a different time. Some would use stealth. Others would create distractions. A few would pretend to be something they were not. A young male cadet raised his hand. "Sir, That sounds like chaos. How could anyone coordinate such a complex attack? Vexitar smiled. That is exactly what I thought. But I was about to learn that chaos can be a weapon when used properly. The screen changed to show a human female in combat armor. She looked small compared to the massive Zephyrian soldiers, but her eyes held a sharp intelligence that made Vexitar remember her clearly. This is Sergeant Lisa Barnes, he said. Morrison assigned her to lead the infiltration team. When I saw her, I thought it was a mistake. She was barely half the size of our smallest warrior. How could such a tiny being fight against armored enemy soldiers? Vexitar pressed another button and the screen showed the inside of Kepler Station. The corridors were narrow and filled with pipes and ventilation systems. Barnes studied the station plans for exactly 10 minutes. Vexitar continued. Then she pointed to the air vents and said, "We go in through here." I told her that was impossible. The vents were too small for proper soldiers to use. She just smiled and said, "Good thing we are not proper soldiers." The cadets looked confused. Why would anyone want to crawl through dirty air vents when they could fight in the open like warriors? Barnes and her team entered the station 3 hours before the main attack, Vexitar explained. They moved through the ventilation system, like hunting animals. They did not announce their presence, they did not demand surrender. They simply appeared behind enemy positions and eliminated them one by one. He changed the image to show a tactical display of the station. Red dots showed enemy positions disappearing one after another, in a pattern that seemed random but was actually very carefully planned. I was watching from the command ship, Vexitar said. Our sensors showed enemy forces getting smaller, but we could not understand how. There were no explosions, no battle sounds, no distress signals. The enemies were just gone. A young cadet spoke up nervously. Sir, what happened to honor in battle? Did the humans not give their enemies a chance to fight back? Vexitar stopped walking and looked at the young soldier with sad eyes. Child, let me ask you something. If your family was trapped in a burning building, would you announce yourself to the fire before trying to save them? Would you give the flames a chance to spread before fighting them? The cadet shook her head, looking confused. War is not a game. Vexitar said firmly, it is not about giving everyone a fair chance. It is about protecting the people you care about by stopping the people who want to hurt them. The humans understood this. We did not. He activated the screen again, showing another human in a military uniform. This man looked older, with gray hair and tired eyes that had seen too much fighting. Captain Ryan Cross, Vexitar said. He was in charge of the main assault team. When the attack began, I expected him to lead his soldiers in a direct charge against the enemy positions. That is what any proper military leader would do. The screen showed a tactical map of the battle. Coalition forces were shown as blue dots, enemy forces as red dots. The blue dots were moving toward the red dots in what looked like a standard attack formation. Cross led his team straight toward the strongest enemy position. Vexitar continued. They fired their weapons and made lots of noise. The enemy forces turned all their attention to this obvious threat. Then, just when it looked like the humans would engage in proper combat, something unexpected happened. The blue dots on the screen suddenly changed direction, moving away from the enemy positions instead of toward them. Cross ordered his entire team to retreat, Vexitar said. They turned around and ran away from the fight. I was shocked. I thought the humans were cowards after all. I contacted Morrison and demanded to know why his soldiers were running from battle. Vexitar paused, remembering his anger and confusion from that day. Morrison told me to wait and watch, he continued. He said the battle was just beginning, not ending. I did not understand what he meant. How could a battle be beginning when one side was running away? The screen now showed a timeline of the battle. Different colored lines showed when various events happened during the attack. For 2 hours, Cross and his team stayed away from the enemy positions, Vexitar explained. They moved through empty corridors, checking rooms that had already been cleared. I thought they were wasting time. I was wrong. The timeline on the screen showed what had really been happening. While Cross was retreating, other human teams were moving into position. Barnes and her infiltration team were taking control of the station's power systems. Another team was capturing the communications center. A third group was blocking all the escape routes. Cross was not running away, Vexitar said slowly. He was drawing the enemy's attention while his teammates completed their real missions. When the enemy focused on chasing his team, they stopped watching everything else. A young cadet raised her hand. But sir, what about the explosions? The battle reports mentioned massive explosions. Vexitar nodded. Ah, yes. The explosions. That was when I truly understood how different human warfare could be. The screen changed to show Cross and his team in a large room filled with machinery. They were placing small devices on walls and equipment while enemy soldiers searched for them in other parts of the station. While the enemy was distracted, Cross had been placing explosive charges throughout the station, Vexitar explained. Not random destruction, but carefully planned demolition. He was turning the station itself into a weapon. The timeline showed the moment when everything changed. All the human teams reached their positions at exactly the same time. Barnes had control of the power systems. The communications team had cut off enemy reinforcements. The blocking team had sealed all escape routes. Then Cross activated his charges, Vexitar said quietly. The explosions were not meant to destroy the station. They were meant to destroy the enemy's ability to fight back. Power systems failed. Weapon batteries went offline. Life support systems stopped working in enemy-controlled areas. The screen showed the final phase of the battle. Enemy forces, cut off from power and communications, surrendered within minutes. The entire operation had taken less than 6 hours. We had been planning to fight for days, Vexitar said. We expected heavy casualties on both sides. We thought victory would require great sacrifice and loss of life. The humans won with almost no losses at all. He turned off the screen and faced his audience directly. That day I learned something that changed my understanding of war forever, Vexitar said. The humans did not fight like cowards. They fought like predators. They used every advantage they could find. They turned the enemy's strengths into weaknesses. They made the battlefield work for them instead of against them. A young cadet asked quietly, Sir, why did our generals not think of these tactics? Vexitar considered the question carefully. Because we were taught that war is about honor and glory. The humans were taught that war is about survival and victory. There is a big difference between fighting to look good and fighting to go home alive. He walked to the window and looked out at the peaceful academy grounds where young soldiers trained in traditional combat formations. After Kepler Station, everything changed, Vexitar said. The enemy had thought they understood us. They knew how we would attack, how we would defend, how we would retreat. But they had never fought humans before. They had no idea what was coming. He turned back to face the cadets. The Battle of Kepler Station was just the beginning. The humans had many more lessons to teach us about war, and some of those lessons were much harder to learn. Vexitar walked back to the center of the room, his old claws clicking softly on the metal floor. The young cadets waited eagerly for the next part of his story. They had been amazed by the Battle of Kepler Station, but Vexitar could see in their eyes that they still did not fully understand what made humans so dangerous in war. The most terrifying thing about humans, Vexitar said slowly, is not their aggression. It is not their weapons or their ships. The most terrifying thing about humans is their creativity when they are trapped with no way out. He activated the wall screen again. This time it showed a beautiful green and blue planet surrounded by the black emptiness of space. But something was wrong with the picture. Dark shapes surrounded the planet like a deadly net. New Geneva, Vexitar said. A coalition research world with 12 million people living on its surface. Scientists, engineers, doctors, teachers, families with children who had never seen war. For 8 months, the hegemony forces had surrounded this planet completely. The screen zoomed in to show the enemy blockade more clearly. Massive warships formed 3 defensive rings around the planet. Nothing could get in or out. The people below were slowly starving to death. Our best admirals had tried to break the blockade 7 times, Vexitar continued. Each attempt failed badly. We lost 43 ships and thousands of good soldiers. The enemy was too strong, too well positioned. According to every military expert in the coalition, New Geneva was lost. A young cadet raised his hand. Sir, What about orbital bombardment? Could we not force them to leave by threatening to destroy their ships? Vextar shook his head sadly. The hegemony had placed their ships very carefully. Any large-scale attack would also destroy the planet below. They were using 12 million innocent people as shields. We could not attack without becoming murderers ourselves. The screen changed to show a much smaller ship. It looked old and beaten up, with patches of different metals welded to its hull. It was not a warship at all, but some kind of industrial vessel. Then Commander Alex Turner arrived with the ship, Vextar said. The Deep Harvest, a mining vessel that had been working in the asteroid belts for 15 years. Turner requested permission to attempt a rescue mission. The cadets looked confused. How could an old mining ship succeed where powerful warships had failed? I had the same question, Vextar admitted. I asked Turner what he thought one small mining ship could do against an entire enemy fleet. His answer was something I will never forget. Vextar paused, remembering that conversation clearly. Turner said, Admiral, you have been thinking like a warrior. I am thinking like a miner. When you want to get through solid rock, you do not punch it with your fist. You find the weak spots and work with them until the whole thing falls apart. The screen now showed detailed plans of the Deep Harvest. The ship was being modified in ways that made no sense to traditional military thinking. Mining equipment was being converted into weapons. Cargo holds were being filled with strange materials. Chief Engineer Kate Rodriguez was in charge of the modifications, Vextar explained. She was a small human female who looked like she belonged in a laboratory, not on a battlefield, but she had ideas that no military engineer would ever consider. The image showed Rodriguez and her team working on the ship's mining lasers. They were adding additional power sources and changing the focusing systems. Rodriguez discovered that mining lasers, when properly modified, could cut through enemy ship armor more effectively than our military weapons, Vextar said. The hegemony had designed their armor to stop energy blasts and projectile weapons. They had never considered that someone might attack them with industrial cutting tools. A young cadet looked skeptical. Sir, surely the enemy would detect these modifications and prepare defenses. Vextar smiled. That was the beautiful part of Turner's plan. The Deep Harvest still looked exactly like a mining ship. All the modifications were internal. From the outside, it appeared to be just another industrial vessel trying to reach the mining stations in the outer system. The screen changed to show the ship's navigation officer, a human male with calm eyes and steady hands. He was working on star charts and trajectory calculations. Navigation Officer Paul Jackson had perhaps the most difficult job, Vextar continued. He had to plot a course that would bring the Deep Harvest close enough to the enemy fleet to attack, but do it in a way that looked completely innocent. The star chart on the screen showed the complex path Jackson had planned. The ship would approach New Geneva by following the normal shipping routes used by mining vessels. It would move slowly and broadcast standard mining operation signals. Jackson realized that the enemy was not paying attention to mining ships, Vextar explained. They were watching for warships and battle fleets. A single industrial vessel requesting permission to collect asteroid samples would be ignored as unimportant. The screen now showed another human, a young female soldier who looked barely old enough to be in the military. She was standing next to a massive piece of mining equipment that had been modified in strange ways. Corporal Maria Santos made a suggestion that seemed completely crazy, Vextar said. She proposed using the ship's ore processing systems to create ammunition from space debris. The cadets looked confused. How could rocks and metal scraps become ammunition? Santos had studied the enemy ship designs, Vextar explained. She discovered that their hulls were designed to deflect energy weapons and explosive missiles, but they were not designed to handle large chunks of metal moving at very high speeds. The screen showed Santos and her team collecting asteroid fragments and loading them into the modified ore processors. The machines ground the rocks into specific shapes and sizes. The ore processors could launch these metal fragments using magnetic acceleration, Vextar continued. It was like turning the entire ship into a massive projectile weapon that fired rocks instead of expensive missiles. He changed the image to show the timeline of Turner's mission. The Deep Harvest had begun its approach to New Geneva 3 days earlier, moving slowly along the normal mining routes. For 2 days, the ship broadcasted routine mining operation messages, Vexitar said. The enemy ignored them completely. Why? Would they worry about one small mining ship when they were expecting battle fleets? The screen showed the moment when everything changed. The deep harvest had reached the edge of the asteroid field that surrounded New Geneva. It was now within range of the enemy blockade. Turner's plan entered its final phase, Vexitar said. The ship activated its modified mining equipment and began what appeared to be normal asteroid processing operations. But Rodriguez had made additional modifications that the enemy could not detect. The image showed the deep harvest suddenly emerging from behind a large asteroid. But it looked completely different now. The hull was covered with additional armor plating made from processed asteroid metal. The mining lasers had been repositioned to fire in all directions. The transformation was incredible, Vexitar said with admiration. In just a few hours, Rodriguez and her team had turned a simple mining ship into something that looked like an ancient Earth battleship. They had used the ship's own equipment to build its armor and weapons while hiding behind asteroids. The screen showed the battle itself. The deep harvest moved through the enemy fleet like a predator among prey. Its mining lasers cut through enemy ships while its improvised projectile weapons smashed holes in their hulls. The enemy was completely unprepared, Vexitar continued. They had been watching for military attacks using military weapons. They had no defense against industrial equipment being used as weapons of war. The battle lasted only 4 hours. The deep harvest destroyed or disabled 37 enemy ships. The blockade was broken, and supply ships began reaching New Geneva within days. But the most impressive part was what happened next, Vexitar said. Turner did not just break the blockade. He captured 3 enemy dreadnoughts completely intact. The screen showed the massive enemy ships floating in space with human crews working to repair them. Coalition engineers were studying every system and piece of technology. How was this possible? A young cadet asked. Santos had modified some of the projectile rounds to carry electromagnetic pulse charges, Vexitar explained. Instead of destroying the enemy ships, these special rounds disabled their power systems without causing permanent damage. Turner's team was able to board the ships and capture them. The screen changed to show human technicians working alongside coalition scientists studying the captured enemy technology. The information they gained would change the war completely. The intelligence we gained from those ships was priceless, Vexitar said. We learned about enemy communication systems, weapon designs, and tactical plans. But more importantly, we learned something about human thinking that amazed us all. He turned to face his audience directly. Turner and his team had not just won a battle, Vexitar explained. They had turned a desperate rescue mission into an intelligence-gathering operation. They had rescued 12 million people and gained valuable enemy technology at the same time. A young cadet raised her hand. Sir, how did they know the plan would work? It seems like there were too many things that could go wrong. Vexitar nodded. You are right. Vexitar's voice became quieter as he prepared to tell the next part of his story. The cheerful mood in the room changed as the young cadet sensed that something different was coming. This part would not be about clever tactics or amazing victories. This part would be about something much harder to understand. Understanding humans means understanding what drives them, Vexitar said slowly, and understanding what they are willing to give up to protect others. This is the most important lesson they taught us and the most painful one to learn. He activated the wall screen one more time. The image showed a rocky mountain with a narrow pass cutting through it. The sides were steep and dangerous, with only one path wide enough for vehicles to travel through. Proxima Ridge, Vexitar said. A mountain pass on the planet Kepler 7. Not important for its minerals or cities, but important for its location. Control this pass, and you control the only road between the eastern and western continents. The screen showed detailed maps of the area. The pass was only 3 kilometers long, but it was the key to moving troops and supplies across the planet. Without it, any army would be trapped on one side of the mountains. 3 million civilians lived in the cities beyond the pass, Vexitar continued. Families, children, elderly people who could not fight. The hegemony was advancing toward them with overwhelming force. We had enough ships to evacuate maybe half the population before the enemy arrived. A young cadet raised her hand nervously. Sir, what about the other half? Could they not hide in the mountains? Vextar shook his head. Sadly, the hegemony did not take prisoners. They had destroyed every civilian population they had encountered. Hiding would only delay death, not prevent it. The screen changed to show a human female in military uniform. She looked tired, with lines around her eyes that spoke of too many battles and too many difficult decisions. But her expression was calm and determined. Colonel Patricia Brooks, Vextar said. She volunteered to hold Proxima Ridge with a small force while the evacuation continued. Everyone knew it was a suicide mission. The enemy had 20 times more soldiers and much better equipment. The cadets looked confused. Why would anyone volunteer for certain death? I asked Brooks the same question. Vextar admitted. I could not understand why she would throw her life away when the outcome was already decided. Her answer changed how I think about courage forever. He paused, remembering that conversation clearly. Brooks told me, Admiral, someone has to give those families time to escape. If we do not hold this pass, they all die. If we do hold it, at least some of them live. The choice is simple. The screen now showed the defensive positions Brooks and her team had prepared. They had only 300 soldiers to defend against 6,000 enemy troops. The humans had built barriers and weapon positions, but everyone could see they would not be enough. I served directly under Brooks during those 3 days, Vextar said. I wanted to understand how humans face certain death with such calmness. What I learned surprised me completely. The image changed to show the first day of the siege. Enemy forces surrounded the pass completely, but they did not attack immediately. They knew they had won already and wanted to savor their victory. Brooks used the delay to prepare her troops, Vextar explained. But she did not give speeches about glory or honor. Instead, she talked to each soldier personally. She asked about their families, their homes, their dreams for the future. A young cadet looked puzzled. Sir, why waste time on personal conversations when preparing for battle? Because Brooks understood something we did not, Vextar replied. She knew that soldiers who are fighting for something they love are much stronger than soldiers who are fighting for abstract ideas like duty or honor. The screen showed Brooks talking to a young human male who looked barely old enough to be a soldier. His name tag read Lee, and his hands were shaking slightly. Sergeant Bobby Lee was only 19 years old, Vextar said. He had joined the military to pay for his education and planned to become a teacher after the war. He was terrified, but he stated his position because Brooks had explained why his sacrifice mattered. The first attack came on the second day. Vextar described watching through his binoculars as waves of enemy soldiers charged up the narrow pass toward the human positions. Lee's section was hit first, Vextar continued. The enemy broke through the outer barriers and reached the main defensive line. That is when I saw something that still gives me nightmares. The screen showed the moment when an enemy artillery shell exploded near a group of wounded civilians who had been too injured to evacuate with the others. Debris was falling toward them like deadly rain. Lee saw the civilians in danger. Vextar said quietly. He could have stayed in his protected position and survived a few more hours. Instead, he left cover and threw himself over the wounded people, using his own body as a shield. The room fell completely silent. The young cadet stared at the screen, trying to understand why someone would choose to die for strangers. Lee saved 6 people that day, Vextar continued. 2 children, an elderly woman, and 3 adults who had been too hurt to walk. He died protecting them, but they lived to see their families again. The screen changed to show another human, a female, private who looked small and young. She was standing next to a massive blast door that was slowly closing to seal off part of the pass. Private Helen Clark was in charge of the emergency barriers, Vextar explained. When the enemy broke through the second defensive line, she activated the blast doors to slow their advance. But one door was damaged and would not close automatically. The image showed Clark struggling with the heavy door controls, while enemy soldiers advanced toward her position. She was completely exposed and could easily have escaped to safety. Clark could have run, Vextar said. The door would have closed eventually, maybe in 10 or 15 minutes. but those extra minutes would have allowed the enemy to reach the evacuation ships before they could escape. He watched as understanding dawned on the faces of his young audience. Clark held the door controls manually while the barrier closed. Vextar continued. She stayed at her post while enemy weapons fired all around her. When the door finally sealed, she was trapped on the wrong side with no way out. A young cadet asked in a whisper, "What happened to her?" "Clark died defending that position," Vextar said simply. "But because of her sacrifice, the evacuation ships had enough time to reach safety. 200,000 more people escaped because one small human chose duty over survival." The screen now showed the final day of the siege. The human positions were almost completely overrun. Only a few dozen defenders remained alive, holding the last barrier before the pass opened completely. "By the third day, we knew the evacuation was nearly complete," Vextar said. Most of the civilians had escaped safely, Brooks and her remaining. Soldiers had accomplished their mission. They could have surrendered with honor. He paused, looking at each cadet carefully. "But the humans had one more lesson to teach us," Vextar continued. Lieutenant Gary Price was piloting the last defensive shuttle. His engines were damaged and his weapons were almost out of ammunition. Enemy artillery positions were preparing to bombard the evacuation routes. The screen showed Price's shuttle, smoking and barely able to fly, heading directly toward the enemy artillery positions. "Price could have retreated and lived," Vextar said. The evacuation was almost finished. His death would not save many more lives, but he made a different choice. The image showed the shuttle's final flight path. Instead of turning away from danger, Price was flying straight into the heaviest enemy fire. Price used his damaged shuttle as a missile, Vextar explained. He crashed directly into the enemy artillery positions, destroying their ability to attack the evacuation ships. His last transmission was just 4 words: "Clear skies for everyone." The screen changed to show Brooks herself, standing in the command bunker as enemy forces closed in from all sides. She was alone now, her soldiers either dead or wounded. Beyond fighting. "Brooks' final transmission is recorded in our military archives," Vextar said. "She called in orbital bombardment on her own position. She gave us the exact coordinates knowing that the strike would kill her along with the remaining enemy forces." A young cadet stood up suddenly, her face pale. "Sir, why would she do that? The mission was already complete. The civilians were safe." Vextar looked at the young soldier with understanding eyes. "Because Brooks knew that every enemy soldier who survived would go on to attack other worlds, other families, other children. She chose to end the threat completely, even though it cost her everything." He activated the recording of Brooks's final message. Her voice was calm and clear, with no fear or regret. "This is Colonel Patricia Brooks, Defender of Proxima Ridge. Mission accomplished. All civilian evacuation complete. Requesting immediate orbital strike on my coordinates. Tell the families that their loved ones mattered. Tell them that every life saved was worth the price we paid. Brooks out." The room was completely quiet now. Several of the young cadets had tears in their eyes as they tried to understand what they had just heard. "The orbital strike destroyed the remaining enemy forces," Vextar said softly. Brooks and her soldiers had held Proxima Ridge for exactly 3 days. The next morning, Vextar returned to the classroom to find the young cadets already waiting for him. Their faces were different now, more serious than before. The stories about Proxima Ridge had changed them overnight. They sat quietly, thinking about courage and sacrifice in ways they never had before. "The war ended 3 years ago," Vextar began, settling into his chair with the careful movements of old age. "But the humans taught us something that goes far beyond victory or defeat. They taught us something that changed not just how we fight, but how we think about ourselves and what we can accomplish." He looked around the room, noting how the young soldiers leaned forward, eager to hear the conclusion of his story. "When the Hegemony Empire finally asked for peace," Vextar continued, "it was not because we had destroyed their fleets or conquered their worlds. It was because they had learned to fear what humans could do when they refused to give up." A young cadet raised her hand. "Sir, how did the war actually end? Did we defeat them completely?" Vextar smiled slightly. That is the most interesting part of the whole story. The final battle was not really a battle at all. Let me tell you about the last human operation of the war. He activated the wall screen, showing a massive space station floating in the darkness, between stars. It was clearly built by the Hegemony, with their distinctive dark metal and angular design. Central Command Station Alpha, Vextar explained. The heart of the Hegemony war effort. From this station they controlled their entire military across dozens of star systems. It was considered absolutely impossible to attack because of its location and defenses. The screen zoomed in to show the station's defensive systems. Weapon platforms surrounded it like a metal forest. Shield generators created multiple layers of protection. Patrol fleets moved in constant circles around the perimeter. For 2 years, our best strategists had studied this station. Vextar continued. Every analysis concluded the same thing. Attacking it would require a fleet so large that we would lose the war even if we won the battle. The casualties would be enormous. He paused, remembering the day when everything changed. Then Colonel Morrison walked into Coalition Command and said 5 words that ended the war. Vextar said. He said, "We do not need to attack it." The cadets looked confused. How could they defeat the enemy command center without attacking it? Morrison had been studying the station for months, Vextar explained. Not its weapons or shields, but its location and purpose. He realized that the station's greatest strength was also its greatest weakness. The screen changed to show a detailed map of the region around the station. Trade routes and communication lines stretched out from it like the spokes of a wheel. Central Command Station Alpha controlled everything, Vextar said. Every order, every supply shipment, every piece of information had to go through this one location. Morrison realized that if the station could not communicate with the rest of the Hegemony forces, those forces would be helpless. A young cadet asked, "But sir, how could we stop their communications without destroying the station?" Vextar smiled. Morrison did not want to stop their communications. He wanted to control them. The screen showed a small human team working on some kind of technical equipment. They were led by a woman Vextar recognized from earlier battles. Chief Engineer Kate Rodriguez had developed something called a signal mirror, Vextar explained. A device that could intercept enemy communications, change the messages, and send them on as if nothing had happened. The cadets stared at the screen, trying to understand how such a device could end a war. Rodriguez and her team spent 6 months infiltrating the communication networks around Central Command Station. Vextar continued. They did not attack anything or destroy anything. They simply placed their devices where they could intercept and modify all messages going to and from the station. The screen showed a timeline of what happened next. Over the course of several weeks, the Hegemony military began receiving contradictory orders. Units were told to move to positions that did not exist. Supply ships were sent to empty space. Attack plans were changed without explanation. The humans turned the Hegemony's own command structure against itself, Vextar said with admiration. Enemy fleets began fighting each other because they received different orders. Supply lines collapsed because ships were sent to wrong locations. The entire military fell into chaos. A young cadet raised his hand. Sir, did the Hegemony not realize what was happening? That was the brilliant part of Morrison's plan, Vextar replied. Each individual order seemed reasonable by itself. It was only when you looked at the whole picture that you could see the chaos. And the only people who could see the whole picture were sitting in Central Command Station, cut off from their own forces. The screen showed intercepted Hegemony communications from that time. Confused commanders asking for clarification, supply officers reporting that their cargo ships had disappeared, battle group leaders wondering why they had been ordered to attack empty systems. Within 3 months, the entire Hegemony war machine had ground to a halt, Vextar explained. Not because of military defeat, but because of confusion and mistrust. Units stopped following orders because they could not tell which orders were real. Commanders stopped trusting their superiors because nothing made sense anymore. The final image showed the moment when the Hegemony leadership realized what had happened. A single message broadcast from Central Command Station to all coalition forces. We surrender, Vextar read from the screen. We request immediate peace negotiations. We acknowledge that we cannot fight an enemy who can defeat us without firing a shot. The room fell silent as the cadets absorbed what they had just learned. The humans had won the war by proving that victory does not always require violence, Vextar said. Sometimes the greatest victory comes from showing your enemy that continued fighting is pointless. He turned off the screen and walked slowly to the front of the room. But that was not the end of the human influence on our galaxy, Vexitar continued. In many ways, it was just the beginning. He gestured toward the window where other classrooms could be seen in the distance. Today, human military advisors work with armed forces on 47 different worlds, Vextar explained. The Morrison doctrine is taught in every military academy in coalition space. Officers from dozens of species come to Earth to study human warfare techniques. A young cadet asked, "Sir, what is the Morrison doctrine exactly?" Vextar thought for a moment before answering. It is the idea that every problem has multiple solutions, and the best solution is often the one that nobody expects. It teaches us to look at warfare not as a series of rules to follow, but as a puzzle to solve. He walked to his desk and picked up a small photograph. It showed 4 figures standing together after a battle: Morrison, Barnes, Cross, and Vextar himself. The humans were smiling, not with the pride of conquerors, but with the relief of friends who had survived something difficult together. The real legacy of the human involvement in our war, Vextar said, is not the battles they won or the tactics they developed. It is the way they changed how we think about what is possible. He held up the photograph so the cadets could see it. Before we met the humans, we believed that war was about following ancient traditions and fighting with honor according to established rules, Vextar explained. We thought that some enemies were too strong to defeat, that some problems had no solutions, that some sacrifices were too great to ask. The cadets listened intently as their instructor continued. The humans showed us that traditions can be changed, that rules can be rewritten, that no enemy is truly unbeatable if you are willing to think differently, Vextar said. Most importantly, they showed us that the greatest strength comes not from weapons or technology, but from refusing to give up when others are counting on you. He placed the photograph back on his desk and faced his audience directly. Today, there is a memorial on Proxima Ridge where Colonel Brooks and her soldiers made their last stand, Vextar said. Representatives from 36 different species visit that memorial every year, not to honor war or violence, but to honor the principle that Brooks represented, that some things are worth any sacrifice. A young cadet stood up slowly. "Sir, what does the memorial say?" Vextar smiled, remembering his own visits to that sacred place. "It is very simple," he said. "Just a few words carved into the mountain stone. They chose to stand when others could not. They chose to fight when victory seemed impossible. They chose to hope when hope seemed foolish. In choosing these things, they chose to be more than they thought they could be." The room was quiet for a long moment as everyone thought about those words. The humans taught us that being a soldier is not about following orders or winning battles, Vextar continued. Being a soldier is about protecting what matters most, even when the cost is everything you have to give. He looked at each young face one final time. Some of you will become officers. Some will become engineers or pilots or strategists, Vexitar said. Whatever path you choose, remember what the humans showed us, that ordinary people can accomplish extraordinary things when they refuse to accept that defeat is inevitable. A young cadet raised her hand one last time. "Sir, are humans still fighting wars somewhere?"